Okay, so welcome everybody. Good afternoon. We're gonna start doing our trade planning session now. Um, okay, so we will start as we usually do. We will start by doing our indices, and so as usual we will start with the dollar index first, and looking at the weekly chart for the US dollar, you can see that we are now in a kind of a pullback, and we have not last week but the week before, which is the week of the 23rd of November, which was leading into the Thanksgiving holiday. We had a decline, which as you can see over here, but all of last week, which is the week that followed the Thanksgiving, we were pretty much in an inside week. I mean, this was the 26th, this is the 27th, and for the last 5 days we're pretty much in an inside week. The bias is still negative and to the downside, but as you can see, the last 3 days, I mean, our close of the week is 80.16. This weekly close, which was the low of the Thanksgiving weekend, or the week of the Thanksgiving, was 80.15. So we are actually above, by closing at 80.16, we are actually above that close, and that would be construed, especially after having this lower day before, that might be a slight buy signal. Our sell signal will be a trade below the 80.04, which is again our structural point, and we are still above it. So our bias is still to the downside, and we are only going to look at selling it once it trades below the 80.04. But right there we can say we have a weak buy signal. This is a buy signal, and if you look at the weekly chart, you can see that the low of the previous is 80.15, and we have closed above that, even though we traded as low as 80. We traded as low as 80.25. So coming back, that is again could be the beginning of a buy. So we're going to leave the dollar as a negative with a slight pullback. So we're only going to take serious sell signals on the US dollar. The next currency that we had a well-defined signal for from last week was the yen. We have identified that the yen is in a bear market, and it is, as you can see on the weekly chart. This was the structure point at 125.63. We broke below it. We are in a bear market, or in a bear leg in the yen. We are looking now towards the 119.15, which is about 200 pips from where we are, to be tested. So we're looking for this decline to be tested. This week, last week, was a negative week we had a slight pullback, which is kind of a gift, and we had the next push to the downside. So we're looking for a trade to the downside to continue. and the bearish move to continue on the yen. So we're looking now for the bear market to continue in the yen, and we are still bearish on the yen. So we're going to leave this as is, and we're going to leave the yen also as a weak currency. So we're looking at selling the yen. The next currency we're going to look at is the Australian, and this is, as you can see, the Aussie right there is pretty much sitting at or around the 103.89 and below the 104.94. This has been in this big range for quite some time. There is no projected fuel to give us the next leg up in the Aussie, so therefore with the rumors coming out that the Royal Bank of Australia is planning to cut interest rate, so the Aussie is still fundamentally one of the strongest currencies up there. You can see that this is pretty much at the top of a bull market. The all-time high is around the 105. We're trading now at 104.10, but we don't have any momentum or anything to fuel the next up leg. So the Aussie now would be fueled, if you will, either by the guys that are going to be taking profit on their positions or liquidating, getting into a long liquidation. A long liquidation for the Aussie is going to be on a trade below the 103.89. So we'll be looking at taking any long liquidation to the downside in the Aussie. So as of yet, we haven't been triggered. It has been oscillating between those two ranges. It is pretty much non-directional. If you look at the weekly chart, again, as you can see, it is pretty strong currency, and that strength is only what's going to fuel the decline. So because these guys that are making a lot of money holding the Australians, the only thing that they have to do now is to sell it so that they can crystallize their profits. And that's what might lead into a long liquidation. And as of now, we're looking at this chart. This week here, this candle is a sell signal because it's below the previous weekly high. It is below the 104.32, which is a 2-week, and it's below the 3-week. So this is a sell signal coming out of the 3 weeks. So that is a potential for a further decline on the Aussie. So we're going to look at the Aussie in the same way as we're looking here. We are going to be kind of going to be with a slight negative bear on it because we're looking now for a long liquidation. Okay, so we're going to be pretty much neutral to the Aussie and as much as we are to the US dollar. The next one we're going to look at is the euro. And this is the weekly chart for the euro. We have closed at 130. The previous weekly high is 129.94. We're closed now. We closed the week at 130. This is quite a positive close, and that would indicate continuation to the upside. What I don't like about this is having it to come back and close below. This weekly high was 17. This was 130.12, and this is 129.94, but having closed at 130 right above this 5 days high, that should give us a continuation to the upside. So we are looking at the euro actually with a positive stance. We're looking for it to continue higher. So what we're going to do with the, let's take a look at the weekly chart. Yeah, I mean this is a pretty strong close. I mean, having this sell-off that came in the week before and coming back and to close like this, that is a pretty strong close, and that should indicate that we should get a continuation to the upside. So we are going to look at the euro as a strong currency, and we're looking to be buyers of the euro when it gets above the high. Now, as we discussed before, and we've discussed last couple of weeks, is that the euro and the Swiss are pretty much moving in tandem, one-to-one with each other, because they're kind of linked. So we are also going to look at the Swiss in the same way. So let's take a look at the Swiss. And as you can see here, this is the chart of the Swiss. We had the same good previous week, not the week before last, and then at the sell-off we came back and we're closing positive for the week. So that confirms the bias that we have in the euro. There hasn't been really much of a real action, any directional action over the last week in the Swiss, but still your bias is to the upside. Last week was a rough week trading, actually it was. So, but the bias is still to the upside, and we're going to be looking at taking it above the 107.93. So basically the setup we're going to have is we're going to be neutral for the dollar and the Aussie, and we're going to be positive for the euro and the Swiss. And of course this is the confirmed trend that we have in the yen. So this is the one that we're going to be looking at selling it across the board. And now we have the two left, which is the British pound and the Canadian. So if we look at the CAD first, and the CAD is, as you can see, we had the structure point, which is the 10099. We traded below it, and we are now in a down bear leg. This is just a gift, so we're looking for the CAD to continue to the downside. This is your structure point, this is the retest, and we're looking now for the next leg to the downside. Pretty much the last week has been pretty much a neutral week, as you have seen in our trading in the room. It was quite frustrating, but again, holding on to the long positions have been rewarding. So we're looking for the Canadian as well as the Australian to trade lower. So we need to make sure that we begin to get the long liquidation in the CAD as much as we get the long liquidation in the Aussie. So we're going to be kind of neutral also for the CAD. Last but not least is the British pound. The British pound, as we have been discussing all the several weeks ago, several months, or actually over the last year, has been in a big la la land. I mean, it's going nowhere in a hurry. So it's pretty much being affected by what's happening in the dollar. Any sell-off in the dollar would lead, I mean, this day that you see here, this was a big sell-off in the US dollar, and you see a big gain in the British pound. If so, this is just I mean, if you look at the weekly chart, this is a sell signal. I mean, this is the bias that we have in the pound, and pretty much non-directional. So the only one we want to pair the pound with is maybe the Japanese yen. So most of our setup from last week is pretty much the same. We're going to be slightly positive to neutral to the dollar, so the way to the pound. So the way we're going to play it, the yen is going to be the first candidate that we're going to look at. So we're going to go long the dollar yen, long the Aussie yen. Of course, we're going to go long the euro yen and the Swiss yen. We can add to it the pound yen on the long side. So we're going to be shorting the yen against all these other currencies, including the CAD also. And then we're going to be keeping an eye on the Aussie and the Euro Aussie for any sell signal, if you will, in the Aussie, so that if we get the sell signal in the Aussie, then we can go long, we can go short the Aussie dollar, we can go long the Euro Aussie, and we can go long the pound Aussie, because this is the one that's going to give us the long liquidation. And the same thing with the CAD. So we're looking for the CAD and the Aussie to get any long liquidation in. So primarily we're looking first at being short the yen across the board. That's the first focal point. We have a trend which is in the yen, so we need to capitalize on that. So we're going to be short the yen against all the other pairs. And then we have the Aussie, as I said, and the CAD are setting up for long liquidation. So if we see that, then we're going to go long the Euro Aussie and long the Euro CAD, long the Swiss Aussie and the Swiss CAD, and of course we're going to be taking the dollar with it. Okay, so this is basically the indices. Let me save the recording, and if anybody has any question, feel free to ask.